Hey, everybody, it's Joe Trippi, and welcome back to a special guest episode of That Trippi Show. This one is a long time in the making, my friends. It goes back to 1979 when I was just a kid in college, excited about Ted Kennedy entering the race, volunteered after running some city council races or working in city council races in San Jose, California. And I got this phone call. And the guy at the other end asked me to go to work, recruiting me to go to work for Senator Ted Kennedy back in 1979 was no other than Lanny Davis, our guest today. And, you know, it's taken a while and we've both been through a lot. But Lanny has a new book out, Finding the Third Way, Lessons in the Politics of Civility from My Journey Through History. And I think there are a lot of lessons we can learn, not just from the book, but from Lanny's experience and his journey. So really looking forward to talking to my old friend and somebody I owe, well, or you can all blame for everything I've done in politics because he got me started. Lanny, welcome. It's great to see you.
Thank you. I don't want to do the math how young we were, but I do want to tell the quick anecdote that I had known Senator Kennedy and he was rather disorganized. And when I went into his headquarters to volunteer to try to organize, there was a box of letters and contacts. And I just blindly called every one of them to say, you want to go to Iowa? And one of them was Joe Trippi. So that's how we got to know each other, Joe. I just went through the box.
Well, it worked. It worked for me. And I got in this beat up old Ford Pinto and drove like a crazy man to Des Moines, Iowa, and went to work in Jones County. So, Lanny, before we get into the book, I want you to talk a little bit about, you know, presidential politics and how things have changed or how they change. What you know in your career, because you've seen so much. You know, what do we expect now? You know, if people are talking about the party's brand, et cetera, and you know, thinking it's going to change in 26. You know, my own experience is midterms take care of midterms because the local candidates, you know, win or lose. But actually, it's the presidential campaigns that define the course of the party. And I don't know if you agree with that, and maybe that gets you into the book a little bit in your journey.
No, I do. The Democratic Party brand gets set at the national level. It's very hard for 50 state parties, and everyone talks about the Democratic Party. You and I know there is no such a thing as the Democratic Party. The Democratic National Committee is just a bunch of people who are DNC members from the 50 states. So when we don't have the White House and don't have the leadership in Congress, it's very difficult to establish any brand, much less a positive one. So that's our difficulty right now. And we've got to come out of it by not only finding people to speak for us, but having a message where we can reach a large chunk of Trump voters who used to vote Democratic. And that's why I wrote the book.
Yeah, your book emphasizes, you know, a third way, you know, beyond partisan extremes. And how do you define that in practical terms, not just philosophically? How do we, and again, I know your experience, you know, you've seen, you know, everybody from Bill Clinton who redefined the party. So it's happened before. Obama did it as well. So just wanted to get this third wave view that you have.
Well, the first insight and the answer to your question is listen to Trump voters who used to be Democrats and ask them, why didn't you vote Democratic? Why would you vote for someone like Trump who's antithetical on many issues to what you believe and certainly on character and conduct? There'll always be an apology. I don't like Trump, but I couldn't vote for the Democrats. And that's when I started to examine writing this book, because the Democratic Party had a brand, and it's not just about Bill Clinton personally, but it had a brand that allowed a Democrat to be elected and reelected president and left office after 2 terms with a 66% job approval rating. So I went back to square one to figure out why was the Democratic Party, after losing landslide elections in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, suddenly able to capture the presidency in 2 straight terms by a governor from Arkansas. And my answer was because we had a different message. That's what brand is about what we stood for. And Clinton took us back to middle class and middle American issues and values. And that's why we had a better brand. It's not just that he did well, but we stood for what middle America and the average person wanted. We then lost that message in the 90s and in the noughts. And I wrote the book about the third way, is to find the common ground with voters who supported Trump but still would like to vote Democrat. And I hope the message is conveyed. Let's look at the way that Bill Clinton governed, and let's look at the way we as Democrats approached the electorate during the Clinton years.
So, Lanny, I think a lot of Americans today, they look at that third way more as sort of like compromise or something that they think equates with weakness or something. I'm not agreeing with it. I'm just trying to like, how do we reframe compromises or consensus building as strength? I mean, and is it? And I guess a big piece of that obviously would be listening to the people that we've lost along the way, and try to meet them where they're at. But I want to, again, from a practical point of view, what do you think we need to do?
Well, I think you're asking the toughest question, and I quarreled with myself about picking a title that used the expression third way, because that could be defined as a mushy center that stands for nothing.
Right.
And that's not me, that's not you. But it was Bill Clinton who defined our party by the expression third way, by a combination of progressive policies on social programs, Social Security and Medicare and all of the programs since Franklin Roosevelt that made the Democratic Party a pro-government, pro-middle class party. But Clinton added an asterisk to government assistance, and that was personal responsibility. And he reformed the welfare system by saying people do not want a lifetime on welfare, they want to work. So he built in a work requirement, but work opportunity and job availability. So he reformed our previous progressive liberal agenda that appealed to middle America. It's not compromised. There's specific programs that government can be seen as the friend, not the enemy. That's our party, as opposed to Republicans who call government the enemy, unless they're being handed out tax cuts while they're being billionaires, and then government is their friend. So I wanted to write a book to recall what worked for us and go back to that to give people who don't like Trump, but did not see the Democrats as an alternative to Trump.
Yeah, with opportunity came, was also responsibility. It was that I do think that's something that is just, again, it's almost, we've lost it civically and a sense of citizenship where we all have a responsibility, and I think that was instilled. And also just the, putting more police on the street in a way that let localities deal with the not a national answer other than making sure that the localities had the number of police and other instruments to help take on crime. I mean, there were so many things that sort of took on real problems head on, but did it in a way that I think really hit people. Really, people got that this was something, that it was a real shift to their concerns. And clearly, there's so many concerns right now: higher prices, all the things that are going on. So, in your view, what are the biggest structural forces, though, that are pushing us all farther apart? Is it the media? Is it primaries? Is it social media? Is it wings of parties fighting with each other? What are the challenges we have to? What's forcing this? And of course, Trump's a big piece of this, obviously, on the division front. But what's your take on the biggest structural forces that are impediment right now?
Well, we have structural problems because both sides, the Republicans and Democrats, have party bases that are to the left or to the right of the electorate. And that's both parties have to deal with our bases that are not where most voters are. But I would take you back as an example to the border security issue. It's very similar to the law and order crime issue. When I first got started in politics through the Edmund Muskie, Richard Nixon era, when Nixon tried to define Democrats as soft on crime, just as we are defined as a party as soft on a secure border.
Right.
And I blame Joe Biden and the Biden-Harris administration for what happened on the border. And I and a lot of progressive Democrats kept asking, wait a minute, what's progressive about letting hundreds of thousands of people jump to the front of the line while a lot of people waited to get it right, because we should be welcoming immigrants, but not the way it was allowed to happen, with no boundaries whatsoever. And a lot of progressives during the time period that we were watching the hordes of people, hordes not being a bad word, just a numerical word,
Right.
coming across the Rio Grande and asking, why is that happening? And I blame the Biden administration for labeling us as not favoring a secure border. So I went back and read the 1995 Bill Clinton State of the Union address. And he talked about secure borders and law and order, enforcing the law and having secure borders. Somebody who is a liberal progressive icon named Barbara Jordan, the late and great Representative Barbara Jordan, who was the head of the Immigration Reform Commission in 1995. So Bill Clinton, during his State of the Union address, as I'm writing the book, and this is in my last chapter, Joe, I literally stumbled over his speech in which he talked about secure borders, immigration reform, and quoted Barbara Jordan. Now, how did we get into the opposite side of that issue from Bill Clinton and Barbara Jordan, that we suddenly appeared to be in support of no secure borders? Anybody can flood over, and there's no vetting system. And we gave that issue to Trump, who demagogued it and used it in, I think, a very ugly fashion. So that's one example where suddenly we allowed ourselves to be defined by Trump as not caring about secure borders. And I read Barbara Jordan is not exactly a conservative icon.
Right.
So how did we lose that message?
How did we let that happen? I mean, how did that? I mean, I asked myself, like, not just that, but on several other issues, like how did we just keep frittering these things away like that when we were, when we were the ones that generated a surplus? The only we create jobs and Republican administrations don't, and somehow on a lot of these things we got put in a corner and are finding a tough time to getting out.
Well, you just said a word that is another reverse definition of how we allowed ourselves to be defined contrary to our record and our values. So let's look at deficit spending. If your parents or my parents went around the world on a first-class airfare, first-class hotels, first-class restaurants for a good period of time using a credit card, not paying for that vacation, and they came home at the end of the vacation, hundreds and thousands of dollars of credit card expenses later, and they dumped all the receipts on our beds as children, and they said, you pay. Now, how did deficit spending become a good thing? It's immoral for us to dump on our children's laps what Trump has done is to increase the national debt and say to our children and grandchildren, you pay. Now, when Bill Clinton decided to be progressive, meaning balance the budget, if necessary, increase taxes and cut spending and reduce the workforce, those are conservative sounding words. What makes them conservative? They're progressive because we're not telling our children and our grandchildren, you pay. So we allowed Republicans to define us in this crazy way that it's okay to increase the national debt, which is what Trump has done by handing over money to billionaires and cutting. We know the trade-off and the big ugly bill was to hand over tax cuts to billionaires and to cut Medicaid and hospital care and health care. So we have to get back to basics. And that's what the third way is. There's nothing mushy in the center there. It's about solving people's problems and not allowing Republicans to define us that we're in favor of anyone coming into the country, no vetting. And that's what happened under the Biden administration. And I blame President Biden and I blame Vice President Harris and the entire administration for not saying, wait a minute, we're the law and order, due process, middle class party. And now we're being defined by Donald Trump as not caring about secure borders. So it's message and it's substance, not mushy compromise.
You know, Lanny, one of the things I've always admired and actually emulated from you is, you know, your commitment and the importance of civil discourse and you know, not. And by the way, I had like 7 years on Fox News where Sean Hannity and everybody's screaming at me most of the time, but I really tried to maintain that sense of civility, respect for even when I totally disagreed with what they were, saying. And it seems to me, and I've even had it, in this era now where Trump and everybody's sort of polarized and at each other's. How do we? I still admire you because when I do see you on TV and you still have that capacity, even even in this back and forth craziness of today. How do we get more people to understand that we've got to listen, be civil, respect? I mean, it just seems tougher and tougher, but somehow you've been able to keep that going throughout your career, no matter what crisis you were in or what crisis you were trying to handle for somebody. I think it's real important to emulate and to get more people to do that, but a very tough time right now to do it.
Well, it is tough now in particular because of the character or lack of character of the President of the United States, and his personal behavior and his conduct and so many other things are offensive to me personally. But if I'm talking to a Trump voter, it doesn't do me any good. It doesn't do the country any good to make accusations and demean the other person who prefers Trump. And the thing I am advising, and I write about in my book, is that I learned through a lifetime of lessons, is the first thing to do is listen. Why do you like Trump over the Democratic candidate? And listen rather than accuse. So when I'm doing TV, and I've seen you do this very well, Joe, on Fox, is rather than using the word you and make an accusation of part of your disagreement, use the word I and say, I disagree, let me tell you why. Or even better, help me understand why you think this, and listen. And I think those are techniques. It's not substance, it's a human relationship. It works well in marriage, by the way, as well as in friendships,
Sure does,
to listen before you accuse. And I think that's the message. I think the Democrats need to learn about dealing with Trump voters who don't like Trump, used to be Democrats, and we need to win them back. Listen, and then try to address the reasons why they chose Trump over the Democrats. And some of them are not about liking Trump at all. It's about disliking us.
So you see, looking at the crop of new leaders that are emerging, Andy Bashir, different and Wes Moore and others around the country. I mean, there's a really young, vibrant, I think, group of Democrats that are a new generation that I think, we're having that sort of generational change in the party. It's going to, I think, be pretty clear to people, and with the new faces that emerge in 2026. Do you think that this next generation of leaders, how do we get them more? Are they going to be more open to this third way, or because we're in this polarized, and again, I guess some of this may be, as we were talking earlier, decided by how they conduct themselves in the race for the nomination in 2028, and is there somebody who fashions a new path for the party But I did want to get your take on sort of what you're seeing out there with this new generation and the crop that may come up. And also back then too, you did have the DLC, the progressive policy, PPI and others, these think tanks that were helping put test new ideas that people like Bill Clinton and I think Al Gore and others were, Dick Gephardt and others were picking up some of those ideas and running with them. Is it some combination of new leadership and new ideas? And do you see places where they're coming from now or will come from?
It starts with the candidate. You and I have worked for candidates that are good ones and bad ones. And I remember when I ran for Congress myself, I realized the big difference is that when I had a bad day and made a bad mistake, I couldn't go home and say, I just worked for really bad candidates, all his fault. Wait a minute, that's my candidate. It was me. Yeah. I wrote a chapter about the mistakes I made in my own unsuccessful race for Congress in Montgomery County, Maryland. But to answer your question, I think that we have a fantastic bench of potential presidents who've already proven that they can be president because they've governed as governors. Mm-hmm. And that's where I would start. There are great people in the House and the Senate who could be presidents, I'm sure. But right now I'm looking for at 10 or 12 governors who could make great presidential candidates. You mentioned one of them, governor in Kentucky, Andy Beshear, happens to have won in a state that Donald Trump carried by double digits. How does he do that? He does that by talking about issues and taking positions that people care about. And I think he's able to talk to Trump voters in ways that say, I like that guy. So let me just give you one anecdote of when I was invited to the Wyoming Bar Association by a Trump supporter I met at a Wyoming ranch. I'm all in red state country. And he got me invited to speak to Wyoming Bar Association members. And when I walked in, all I saw were Trump MAGA buttons. And I knew that this was red country territory. So I started out by talking about common ground. Mm-hmm. And I asked them, are you all in favor of big government? No. Common ground. Neither am I. Oh, but you're a Democrat. You've always been in favor of big government. Wait a minute. I'm not in favor of government that tells my wife or my daughter what to do when they have a relationship with a doctor and a doctor is advising them on their health care, their reproductive rights. I'm against big government. Stay out of that relationship. And somebody in the audience raised their hand and said, Mr. Davis, I agree with that. Even though I'm pro-life, I'm not in favor of big government. I'm in Wyoming. Right. So common ground is we're civil libertarians and we listen to due process requirements. So there's a commonality there. And that's why people did not respond well, even Trump supporters, to ICE out of control, ignoring due process rights. That was big government at its worst. So in my book, I talk about finding common ground that exists if we listen and identify what do we agree on before we start to call each other names.
So, you've seen so much in your journey. I just wanted to see, because we're getting close to, I have a few more questions, but one of them I've really wanted to ask you is, so what's the one moment, is there one moment in your career that just really stands out that sort of taught you what was possible or made you see what was possible in terms of, finding middle ground, finding that common ground, is it still possible in today's climate, or is it tougher now in today's climate?
First of all, I'll be short in my answers. Sorry if I'm a little bit too long here, but this is a great question. Everybody's got a moment where it's a, yes, yeah. I see what we've been doing wrong. And for me, that moment was when Bill Clinton was willing to sit down with Newt Gingrich. And I watched the two of them did not like each other. It was not easy for either one of them. I've talked to both of them about these moments. They both agreed that deficit spending, credit card spending, dumping receipts on the beds of our children was wrong. Common ground between conservative and I will call Bill Clinton a liberal. Some people would call it progressive, but they found common ground that deficit spending was immoral. And we needed to not cut taxes on the wealthy. We needed to increase taxes to pay off our debts and not hand over the receipts to children. So my answer to your question is the Gingrich-Clinton ability, and Joe Scarborough, now a television star, was part of the conservative caucus that helped work through the compromises necessary to balance the budget. So what did we end up with after 2 terms of Clinton working with Gingrich and the conservatives in Congress? Because it wasn't just Clinton, it was the conservatives in Congress working with Clinton. We ended up, are you ready for the word? With a $300 billion surplus.
Yep.
Surplus, reducing the national debt. Now, is there a conservative or a Trump voter who wouldn't agree with those words? No, I haven't called Trump names. I've identified an issue that we agree on. But we liberals, we progressives, somehow allowed ourselves to be identified with big government. No, excuse me, I don't like big government. I gave you an issue where we want government out of our bedrooms, out of our private lives, and let women decide their own health care with their physicians. And deficit spending, is that liberal? No, it's immoral. It's using credit cards. So every time or as you mentioned, law and order. Are we against law and order? Is that a liberal position that we like crime? Just as the borders, an open border isn't liberal. What they allowed to happen under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris was not liberal. It was wrong and it was lawless. But why are we not willing to find that common ground? And I think the final answer is speak to our base and be willing to challenge our base.
Before we go, I wanted to, you see this right now, so many people, everyday citizens who feel powerless in this divide. What are 2 or 3 concrete actions that they can take to embody this third way in their own communities? Do you have any advice? Does your book talk about that at all?
Yes, and it's a good closing, at least understanding of why I wrote this book, is that both Democrats and Republicans think alike on a lot of issues, but we let our bases, who are on the extremes, cause us to be so divided and afraid to reach out and find common ground. So the one message that I would remind our party is that there's nothing wrong with reaching across the aisle and finding common ground. And that does mean compromise, but it means taking a principle and not asking for 100% and accepting 80%. But at least that's my message on the lesson of finding common ground and listening and not using accusatory words, not demonizing political differences is the key. And Democrats can win back the country and sometimes win the presidency by that approach, rather than using rhetoric that's accusatory and which says to people that you are evil rather than that you're wrong. And that's a distinction I learned from Bill Clinton and other people like him.
Thanks, Lanny. That's a great way to close this. Lanny, thank you for coming on. And thank you for that call so many years ago.
Thanks.
That got me started. If people want to blame, upset about the Dean campaign or anything else that I've done, it all started with a call from Lanny Davis. And I'm very grateful for that, and so grateful that he came on today, and really urge you to go out and get a copy of Finding the Third Way by Lanny Davis. We'll put a link to where you can find the book in our show notes. It's really important, I think, to understand that civility, that listening, that reaching out to neighbors you stopped talking to a few years ago. Now's the time to reopen those conversations and really listen and start to build that new big tent party and redefine it as we enter 26 and of course the presidential race in 2028. Thanks, Lanny, for being with us, and thanks everybody for listening. Make
Thank
sure to join us at sez.us. It's a civil social network for real people, no bots, no algorithms. And always remember, this podcast will always be free and is part of Lincoln Square. So check out the latest at lincolnsquare.media. Also, if you're listening to this episode on YouTube, please like and subscribe to get alerts when we post the next one. And you can always send us a question to thattrippyshow@gmail.com or leave us a question and review on iTunes. We'll see you next week. Thank you, Lanny, for being with us today. Really
Thank you,
appreciate
Joe.
your thoughts.
Thanks to all.